ending all plausible deniability, providing alleged motives, and the reasons we have for pursuing all of this. We want city water lines extended. We wanted a removal, authority, enforcement-led action to clean up the primary source and to get the proper vapor assessment. We want accountability and reform. We want environmental justice for the Rices, the Robinsons, and South Asheville. By now you know the allegations. EPA Region 4 faked an incident on August 21st, 1999, ran it through the U.S. Coast Guard National Response Center on August 23rd, 1999, to create a fake CERCLA site, to generate $200,000 to respond to a pre-existing site's contamination, to respond to the CTS of Asheville, Inc. site, and the contamination at the Rices and Robinsons. It was to generate the $200,000 in CERCLA funding for the response. And they dropped it on the Rice property. NC Diener on August 16, 1999, sent EPA Region 4 a 3-page letter with a 43-page attachment, clearly linking CTS of Asheville to the contamination at the Rices and Robinsons. And who received it? Don Rigger, USEPA, Jennifer Wendell, USEPA, Doug Lair, USEPA. They received the 43-page attachment. You remember the map from the 1990 investigation and the cover sheet from that CERCLA investigation that was published February 22nd, 1991. You remember the maps that showed the proximity of CTS to the contamination, even the elevation slope? This was all sent to Rigger and Wendell and Doug Lair, and they received Diener's map of the 9 wells that were sampled within a half a mile of the plant, clearly labeling CTS next to the springs and the Robinson well. There should have been no doubt from the first 3 pages, but then when you get to the first chain of custody, you see clearly that CTS is listed as the location or site on Mills Gap Road, and that it was an emergency. CTS, Mills Gap Road, Asheville, North Carolina, the ditches, the ditch that Chu Chi and Max Hainer sampled. It was clear right from the beginning. 3 days later, on July 12th, the West Springs were sampled on the Rice property. Again, CTS, Mills Gap Road, listed. How much more clear could it have been? If Max Hainer and Chu Chi made a mistake, they could have corrected it, but they didn't, because it wasn't a mistake. Then there was the facts from Chu Chi showing that the Robinson well was 1,200 feet down gradient of the CTS site. All indicators put it on CTS of Asheville. And it was an emergency. It was an emergency groundwater situation. And how did EPA respond to that? How did EPA respond to that 3-page letter with the 43-page attachment clearly linking CTS of Asheville CERCLA site to the ongoing toxic disaster that was unfolding, first reported on July 8th, 1999? How did they handle that? What did they do? They faked an incident. They ran it through the U.S. Coast Guard. They created a new CERCLA site. They dropped it on the Rice property. Defying logic, defying the 43-page attachment connected to the 3-page letter. These are the allegations, that they would put that CERCLA site on the victim's property to generate the $200,000 to hide the fact that they had botched a pre-existing site. So what did everyone else already know? All EPA Region 4 had to do was simply read the newspaper. Two days after Bob Taylor reported the incident, the hazardous situation at the Rice property, on July 10th, 1999, the Citizen Times published their first piece. Oil-like contamination found in Arden Spring. Neighbors suspect defunct plant may be to blame. Taylor, who has been staying in one of the 2 homes that get their water from nearby springs, discovered the contamination Thursday and notified state environmental officials. We're going to take some samples and proceed with an investigation, said Max Hainer of the Asheville office of the NC Division of Water Quality. It looks like there's an accumulation of oil in this ravine, and we need to find the source. It appears to be coming out of the ground in the spring. Neighbors believe a likely source is the former CTS of Asheville plant, which is located near the intersection of Mills Gap and Penner's Cove Roads, just a few hundred feet to the west of the contaminated property owned by Larry and Dot Rice. I'd say they're at the top of the list of candidates, Max Hainer said. The CTS plant manufactured industrial switches and resistors before shutting down in 1986. Since then, it's been used primarily as warehouse space. The plant site is one of several hundred in North Carolina on the state Superfund priority list. That means there is some contamination issue with the site that needs to be resolved, said Charlotte Jesnick. head of the State Inactive Hazardous Sites Branch. Further work needs to be done. It has to wait its turn in priority to be addressed. However, Jesnick said she couldn't reveal details about why the site was placed on the Superfund list without further research. Already keeping secrets. Couldn't reveal. That length of time indicates a continuing, ongoing release of contamination, said Chu Chi, a state hydrologist who surveyed the site with Hainer. He said it appears unlikely that the material had been dumped into the spring. During his inspection Friday, Chi said he found the oily material seeping from the ground in 2 other locations near the original discovery. Hainer said his investigation will include checking for possible sources at the former CTS plant. We'll have to check to see the location of their tanks and what they were keeping in them, he said. Steve Dixon, photographer for the Citizen-Times, had a cut line that said a spring basin polluted with an oily substance. The former CTS plant on Mills Gap Road is considered a possible source of the contamination. CTS referenced 5 times on July 10th in the newspaper, 46 days before Stroud and Rigger's incident report, 44 days before Stroud's special $200,000 pollution report. July 28th, 1999, Citizen-Times article. This article dealt with NC Diener's testing of 9 wells located within a half a mile of the CTS site. July 28, 1999, neighbors near CTS site want wells tested for chemicals. Skyland. Shirley Harold doesn't know how she contracted the cancerous growth that invaded her sinuses last year. Same for the throat cancer that her husband Carl was treated for. But the Harolds live within a quarter mile of the site where extensive groundwater contamination was recently discovered, and they'd gotten their drinking water from a well for close to 3 decades. It is unknown if their water is contaminated, but today workers from the Asheville office of the North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources will begin sampling wells in the vicinity of the former CTS of Asheville plant on Mills Gap Road in their search for answers. We've all been real concerned since all this happened, said Harold, who underwent radiation treatment for her cancer and is hopeful she is cured. Maybe we're getting paranoid for no reason. George Kushner, who oversees the operation of a well serving 6 families about a mile southeast of the CTS property, also requested a test. A couple of families have small children, he said. I just felt like it would be prudent to have the test done. The contamination was uncovered earlier this month when a resident discovered a dark, oily liquid oozing up into the springs on the property next to the plant, which manufactured industrial switchers and resistors for more than 20 years before closing in 1986. Testings of samples from the spring revealed high concentrations of trichloroethylene, a common industrial solvent used at the CTS plant as a degreaser. One sample contained the toxic chemical at a concentration of 21,000 parts per billion, which is more than 7,000 times North Carolina's groundwater standard for trichloroethylene. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency considers the chemical a possible or probable human carcinogen. The samples also contain benzene, xylene, and toluene, which are components of petroleum products. To cancel, the next step for investigators is to determine if the contamination has reached any wells in the area. That testing is to begin today. There were about 400 private wells within 3 miles of the plant property in 1990, according to an EPA report. EPA was there in 1990, sampling and confirming the migration of contaminant. 1990, June 25th, June 26th. Some of the same pollutants found in the spring were discovered in the soil and stream samples on the CTS property during a 1990 investigation by EPA. They knew it in 1990, they knew it in 1999. And the newspaper knows it, and they're printing it. There were 2 references to EPA's 1990 FIT SSI Phase 2 investigation. Dots are connected by the Citizen-Times on July 28, 1999. The July 29, 1999 article. More connections. July 29, 1999, Skyland Wells tested for contamination. Becky Robinson is thankful state environmental officials saw fit to test her well Wednesday to determine if it has been tainted by toxic chemicals. She is concerned about the health of her family, including 2 young grandchildren she cares for during the day. Becky's mother-in-law died of pancreatic and liver cancer. Becky's daughter was given a preliminary diagnosis for thyroid cancer. Becky's grandsons have had lifelong health problems. But other residents in the vicinity of the former CTS of Asheville plant on Mills Gap Road in Skyland say they're worried that the North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources isn't moving fast enough. 2 workers in the department's groundwater section sampled several wells at homes along Concord Road Wednesday, and that's all the testing that's being planned for now to find out if the contaminated groundwater near the plant has migrated. That's not good enough, said Mike Bolus, who lives on Penner's Cove Road, less than a mile from the CTS property. I just think they have a responsibility to check everybody's well at this point, he said. People's health are at risk, and you're not going to know unless it's tested. Definitely would seem to me that they should do everybody within 3 miles. They let this thing go on for 10 years almost. It was almost 10 years earlier that EPA had been there trespassing on the Rice property. Okay, now check this. It was in 1990 that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency conducted an assessment of the CTS plant, which shut down in 1986. The agency found several toxic chemicals in the soil and surface water on the plant property, but the groundwater wasn't tested. The groundwater was tested. It was 4,226 feet away, when the Rices and the Robinsons were significantly closer. Watch the motive appear. EPA didn't consider the site contaminated enough to place it on the Superfund National Priority List site for cleanup, and it was left to the state to determine if and when a cleanup was needed. Nothing was done. Earlier this month, a resident discovered a dark, oily substance in the springs just east of the plant property. Testing showed extremely high levels of trichloroethylene, a common industrial solvent, and other chemicals. The state planned to collect samples from about 10 wells Wednesday along Concord Road near its intersection with Mills Gap Road, about a quarter of a mile from the CTS plant, said Kay DeCant, acting regional supervisor for groundwater. August 25, 1999, Citizen Times article. 2 days after Stroud's special pollution report, creating a fake CERCLA site. 4 days after Stroud and Rigger created a fake incident report. The disaster caused by the CTS of Asheville Inc. CERCLA site. Everything you'd need to know is in this one single article. EPA targets Skyland site for cleanup. Location of former CTS plant added to the Superfund program. They even gave a diagram showing where the CTS plant was, yet it wasn't the CTS of Asheville site. It was the alleged counterfeit site, Mills Gap Road groundwater contamination site, dropped on the Rice property, victimizing the victims. What could be worse than violating the Rice's 14th Amendment rights to equal protection under the law and due process? What could be worse than creating a fake Superfund, as we allege, calling it Mills Gap Road groundwater contamination site, using a faked incident, running it through the United States Coast Guard National Response Center to generate $200,000 to respond to a pre-existing Superfund site known as CTS of Asheville? What could be worse than that? Only the way the site's been handled ever since. Only the blatant disregard for human health and the environment. Only the betrayal of EPA's guidance, rules, regulations, and the law. What could be worse? Please click on EPA-Fake CERCLA Part 3-A